Please put your hands together for Premiership players Chris Masten and Will Schofield, along with Luke Hodge and the legendary BT. Everybody, put your hands together for them. How are you, boys? You going well? Nice to see you all. Microphones are up. Yep. Master, I heard you had a big night last night. Great to see you here.
Working hard, mate. Very hard.
Yeah, what happened last night?
I'm in the wine industry, so I just went to work, basically. Fell into about 15 bottles of wine.
Okay. Did this happen in your playing days at all at any time? Like, we used to have bourbon
every
night
Tuesday.
on Thursday.
Yeah, Tuesday was the day.
Yeah. Hodgie, you're chuckling.
Well, Hodgie would know about it, wouldn't he? Didn't he get done TD before a finals one year, Hodgie? It's DUI, mate.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So I just laughed at the midweek because when I first started playing, early 2000s, the midweek session was a normal thing.
Yeah.
And now if you have a drink 6 days before a game, it's like, no, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that, and get in trouble for it. So it's amazing how footy's changed in some ways for the better, but in other ways,
Way for the worse.
Probably not that enjoyable.
Yeah, well, we had our Premiership reunion on about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
So far in this event today, you've got yourself into premierships on 2 occasions, Carl.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, you didn't play in one, Brian, so I'm allowed to talk about it. Everyone else on the panel actually played in a Premiership except for you, Brian. You're the odd one out.
No, that's all right. But no one here won a Coleman medal, did they?
No.
There you go. Did you win one of those?
No, don't be silly.
Actually, speaking how football's changed, has everyone seen the vision of BT talking to
Shut
umpires?
up, Hodgie.
You're sitting there giving fist shakes. If we did that now, you'd get 5 weeks suspended.
I think we've got a bit of vision of that, actually. Can we roll the vision of BT so that even if it's just rolling in the background? Because
They were tolerant in those days, Carl.
There you go. Oh,
Brian, they weren't that tolerant, were they? Because one thing that you will see shortly, I mean, this is a little bit of Brian actually taking marks and kicking goals, which, by the way, he was very, very good at. Averaged 5 shots a game, kicked 3.76 goals a game, as thinks BT. So, had a brilliant career. But the bits about the umpires, what was going on? A little bit of the clip's going to come up in a moment.
Yeah. I don't know what happened, but something happened. Not really that proud of it, to tell you the truth, but, they were there and they were probably wrong on a few occasions, so we were just correcting them. But they were great. They were great personalities, and guys like Glenn James and Peter Cameron, who not many people here would know, but you were able to talk to umpires, not necessarily in a nice manner, in any manner you wished, and they would respond accordingly how they were spoken to. Yeah. And that was a great relationship that players and umpires had in those days.
So you can't give us an example of what was actually said between yourself and Peter Cameron?
Actually, it's funny you say that. I do have an example here. This is a tribunal transcript. I was reported twice in this particular game for abusive language. Can I apologise in advance for what you're about to hear? This is not something I would normally do at a function like this, but this is a transcript, word for word, of what I said at the tribunal and what the umpire said about what I said at the tribunal. Umpire Holt said Taylor had thrown for a mark and brought the ball down. It had not been paid because it had been touched. He said it was a mark. I marked the fucking thing and then he pelted the ball at me, said Umpire Holt. Umpire Holt told Taylor to settle down. He stepped towards me, Mr. Busy, and was toe-to-toe and said I wouldn't fucking know. The umpire said he again told Taylor to settle down. Then he told him he'd been reported when the abuse continued. Mr. Busy, this is the umpire, I told him he'd been reported. He said fuck off and get on with the fucking game. And I wanted his number, but player Taylor said if I wanted his fucking number, I could go around and fucking get it, said Umpire Holt. Regarding the second charge of abusive language, Umpire Holt said Taylor had continued shouting and when he went back to restart the game. Mr. Busy was about 3 or 4 metres away and was yelling, bounce the fucking ball and make sure you stay out of my fucking way, you little prick. Umpire Holt said Taylor was then reported in his evidence, denied, this is me in my evidence, denied using the word on 10 or 12 times, claiming he'd only used it on 3 occasions. This is me to the tribunal now. Mr. Busy, I don't know what the umpire said, but either I'm dumb or I've got a bad memory. But how anyone can remember all those fuckings has got me fucked, Taylor told the tribunal. And I got 3 weeks for abusive language, probably because of the last line.
That was great.
Hey, Hodgie, you went to the tribunal a few times. Was it like that or not?
I said how the game has changed a little bit from we went through a phase where we had the reprimands. So you'd go and do something and get hit, and it'll be a $300 fine, and then $1,000, and then the third one you get a week. I'm avoiding the question because I went 19 times.
How many?
19.
So what was your best excuse?
There was one, Chad Wingard, there was an accident. I went to bump him and the post was there and I bumped his head into the post. So that was... I was a big one that if you made a mistake, you put your hand up. And you got to think, I got coached by Alistair Clarkson. So this is a bloke who's punched himself in the head, got reported for knocking a bloke out over in London in a practice match. He's broke his toe from kicking drink bottles that were on the ground. So there was a game against...
Put a hole in the wall in the coach's box.
Put a hole in the wall. And this is when we're playing Collingwood, and we're up, and he walked out at quarter time and punched a hole in the wall. Wait to see when we were down. But I played under a coach who, against Essendon, Paul Chapman, when he went from Geelong to Essendon, I sort of knew him because we had some good battles. And I've picked him up off the ground and just carried on. Clarko grabbed me. He didn't show me any of my game apart from me picking him up. He goes, "You don't play your best football when you be nice to opposition. Next time he's on the ground, give him one." So my defence was whenever you were near someone and the game wasn't going your way, Clarko would look at myself or a Jordan Lewis or someone like that to try and physically intimidate the opposition. But unfortunately, how the game was starting to shift from BT's dirty era into ours is you couldn't do that kind of stuff. And it worked sometimes, and you had to cop the punishment. So a lot of the times I went there, I pled guilty and put my hand up and took the punishment.
Carl, I had a good one. Clayton Oliver, absolute superstar of the game now, one of the best midfielders in the competition. Subiaco Oval, I think it was his first or second year. There was a bit of a skirmish around half-time. And I went in there, must all know this, I always used to like to defend my players. I went in there, there was a up-and-coming Luke Shuey in the middle of the skirmish. I went to grab him out, and Clayton, we were just walking back to the bench and to get out of there. I didn't want anything to do with anyone, and Clayton got him away, and I happened to throw an elbow. I wasn't aiming for Clayton's head, but it perhaps may have made contact with Clayton's chin. Anyway, I got reported, given 2 weeks, and we challenged it at the tribunal. David Grace, terrific legal counsel at the West Coast Eagles. I think we spent 3 hours trying to come up with a term to define my contact that I made with Clayton Oliver. Was it an elbow? Was it a strike? Was it a bump? We landed on feathered. So I feathered Clayton Oliver's chin, and he went down like an absolute sack of spuds. I got off at the tribunal, 0 weeks, but the tribunal went for that long, went for about 4 hours. I went and trained the next day. I did my hamstring and I missed 3 weeks instead of the 2 I would have got for the tribunal.
Masto, have you been to the tribunal or not?
Yeah, I went one time.
Oh,
I was found guilty of biting.
Oh.
That's worse than what we've done.
It was involuntary. So David Grace once again.
Oh, that was Nick Subin, wasn't it?
Yeah, Nick Subin.
Yeah,
How are you,
now.
Nick?
You had a jaw expert there, didn't you?
I had a jaw expert. So what happened was I was hit.
Mustn't have worked. He got found guilty.
I was hit late and in the mouth, and the jaw expert, as he did say, is a completely involuntary action. So when you get hit in the mouth, you bite.
Yeah.
And I bit him real hard.
I think that was the first case since when Todd Viney's fingers slipped into Chris Lewis's mouth when he was trying to gouge the inside of his mouth and Louis decided to bite him. Now, I worked it out before we got up on stage today. You two were born in 1989. That was they were both 1 when BT finished in 1990. I think, Hodgie, you were 6 years of age. When I was at boarding school, BT, I was 12 when you started your career back in 1980. Now, how did you get to go and play in Victoria when you're only 18, when everyone else had to wait a while?
Yes, I was from Mandurah, born and bred in Mandurah, and grew up here. And as a 16-year-old kid, had this incredible opportunity. Not many people went to the VFL without having a massive experience like Barry Cable and the Crackers and all of those guys would have had in those days. But I went without any, basically straight out of Mandurah as a 16-year-old kid. Richmond saw me at a carnival, said, yeah, we'll try this. Steve McCann was the other one that came from, I think, Geraldton or Donga or somewhere up there. Had gone over as an unproven player, an untried player at any level of senior footy here in WA. I was the same, And it was the best decision of my life to go. I remember I had a job already. I'd just left school as a 16-year-old, only just finished year 10, had a job at Alcoa at the bauxite mine in Pinjarra there, was ready to start work. Richmond roll up with a contract on the table, and my mum and dad was a truck driver, mum was at home, and it was just too good to refuse, and accepted that. 6 months later, I found myself in Melbourne.
Now, obviously, you had a brilliant career kicking goals, won that Coleman medal, I think, in '86. Now, in 1990, I remember vividly playing a number of games, and there was some reason Collingwood and West Coast didn't like each other. And you had plenty of lunatics. I mean, we've seen a little bit of how you carry on, but you had Banks, Morwood, Kelly, Mullane, and the list goes on. What was it about Collingwood and Victoria Park and getting warm urine tipped on us when we left the field and all of those horrible things that used to happen back then?
It was just a distinct disliking for West Coast Eagles. It was led by John Worsfold. We hated him and didn't really like him at all, and Mullane hated him. So there was this animosity right from the start. They had words, I don't know exactly what was said, and from there those games always conjured up more interest from the players' point of view. I'm not sure that many in the crowd actually knew about it, but from a player's point of view, they were great battles.
Do you think 2018 would have helped or hindered that, Brian, West Coast beating Collingwood in a premiership, grand final?
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have helped a lot. I wouldn't have thought, but no, they're pretty good. You've got to hand it to them.
What was the celebration like after 2018, you two, given that you were able to fight back 5 goals down?
Ask Chris. It looks like he's still on.
Still on it?
It was very quiet, actually. Nizzy actually cancelled our celebration, didn't he?
No, we looked after. We looked after. I had a good couple of beers, quiet beers.
I sat on Nizzy's lap for about 15 minutes and gave him a few kisses. Actually, he loved that.
Yeah, I mean, beating Collingwood was exceptional. It was very good. And let's not talk about 2015 though, Carl.
But that 2018, Carl?
Yeah, 2018.
2018. Look, as a commentator now, in what I do now, I was working on that particular day. My memory of that was with Bruce McAvaney, probably one of the great callers Australia's ever seen and the world's ever seen. And Bruce, being such a generous guy, as Hodge would know, he always wanted you to call the big moments. And I remember, as a commentator, you're always thinking, you do about 30 seconds each and you tap the guy on the shoulder and you hand over. And with about a minute and a half to go in that grand final, you sort of roughly know, if you work out the time in your mind, who's going to be calling the last 30 seconds. And that's every commentator's dream, to be calling the last 30 seconds. And I remember when McAvaney tapped me and there was about 30 seconds to go, I thought, shit, I actually don't know what I'm going to say here if, they happen to get up and win. And I remember that we have a button in the truck that you can press down to the producer, and there's a stats guy down there, and he's unbelievably good, isn't he, Josh Kay? And he gave a line, I forget what it was, but it described whatever it was in its best possible way. So for a commentator, that moment was just absolutely incredible. Probably the best pressure goal I've seen kicked in the last minute of a game for, since I've been calling since 1990.
Scully, you remember that last passage of play, wouldn't you? Word for word, pretty much.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't have happened without me. I will start with that. I mean, it was McGovern to Vardy to Ryan to Sheed, right? And then Sheed from the boundary. But I was actually standing in the middle of the MCG to kick this play off. On that day, I was given a pretty specific role, play on Jordan De Goey, stop him from kicking goals. He kicked 3 goals, but they were from the midfield. It was nothing to do with the back line. It certainly wasn't my fault. But with about 2 minutes to go, we were down by 4 points. And I thought, this is going to be maybe my last chance at winning a premiership. I knew my role, stay in the goal square, don't leave. So I thought with 2 minutes to go, time to put the Superman cape on and go and win it for the boys. So I went running down the middle of the ground while the ball transferred to the wing. And I ended up in the middle of the MCG, and there was a contest. I remember it clearly. Jack Darling, who just turned himself into a monster that season and the second half of that game. It was a one-on-one contest, and I thought, if he marks this, I was standing in the middle of the MCG. I'd grown up in Geelong, watching Geelong lose grand finals my whole life against the mighty West Coast Eagles, and I thought, this is my moment. Jack Darling's going to mark this ball. I'm going to get the ball in the middle of the MCG, potentially run the whole way after 10 bounces and a couple of balks, kick the ball into the stands, jump into the stands, and here's my moment. Back to reality, Jack Darling doesn't mark that ball, and I'm standing in the middle of the MCG. Jordan De Goey's in the goal square, and who's on him? Jeremy McGovern, because Jezza Not a good runner. Not a good runner. Very lazy man. So he's standing, takes that great mark, closes his eyes. Not a great kick either, Gov. I'm not sure if you've realised that, West Coast. Not a very good kick. Closes his eyes, kicks to Vardy, who... Bit of a ruckman.
Yeah, he's dumb.
Nathan Vardy closes his eyes, kicks to Liam Ryan, who is the only bloke in this whole play that does anything of any note. Takes a great mark, is smart enough to get the ball, play on quickly, kicks to Dom Sheed. Dom Sheed cops a shepherd from Willie Rioli. He plays on from the boundary, but isn't called from by the umpire. And Sheed has never kicked a goal like that in his life and still hasn't done it since. But none of this happens without Will Schofield standing in the middle of the MCG, not doing his role. So yes, I do remember it, Carl, very well.
Standing in space, Scurry. Hodgie, you were unbelievably good. 4 grand finals, 2008, 13, 14, 15, beating West Coast. What can you tell us through that period of time? You were captain as well.
I was told not to talk about 15, more reflect on 13 when we beat Fremantle.
Yes.
So I was told by a few supporters that they don't forget that day. But I must admit that to see the change when we played over here 2-15, the first final, when you guys absolutely pantsed us, and how abusive, because as you said, I'd just got done 2 weeks prior, how abusive the West Coast supporters were, but how funny. But then you go 4 weeks later, and I've never seen a more respectful bunch post-grand final. And you know how, look, supporters ride the bumps with them, and grand finals it means so much to them. But after what I heard from some of the supporters on the first final, which was quite comical, and some of my teammates were laughing at them, yelling what they were saying over the fence to me, but post 2-15 grand final, I remember we ran into a few of the Eagle supporters as we were going to our post grand final celebrations, and could not be more respectful. They were just sort of saying, great final series, we're a better team on the day, which really shocked me after a month earlier after what I copped. But when you finish grand final days, it sort of shows what it means to supporters, both the celebration side, but also how broken-hearted they were, but how still respectful they were on the day.
What about the practical jokers back amongst your group? Who are the leaders, and is there something you can tell us today that sticks in your mind?
Brian Lake's probably one who first comes to mind, and my first encounter of Brian Lake was on a Sunday morning after he'd just been traded to Hawthorn from the Bulldogs. I was rocking up with my wife and my 2 kids at Officeworks, and on a Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, Brian Lake's name come up on my phone, and I thought, that can't be good. And it went from him getting arrested at the Portsea Polo, and then you fast forward a couple of years, he gets Norm Smith Medal in 2013. But the thing that sticks in my mind about Brian Lake the most is, I think it was post either 14 or 15, might have been post 15, there was a Gatorade golf buggy on the MCG just to bring in all the drinks. He's got his 2 kids there. So a mature person would make sure the kids don't go anywhere near the cart. Brian gets his kids to jump on the golf buggy, the Gatorade golf buggy, and starts driving around the MCG on it. And you had security guards chasing him. But I think that just sums up, while all the teammates were celebrating and seeing our families and talking to our coaches and celebrating with the crowd, Lakey's off doing his own thing, driving a Gatorade golf buggy around the MCG.
What about back in your day, Masto? You were one that didn't mind having a bit of fun, I hear.
Yeah, I had a crack. Jeremy McGovern's probably the biggest prankster, whether it be reverse kangas in your hotel toilet or... His life mission is to stitch my missus up. So he put a fake spider in my car, in the, what do you call that? The mirror, like the blind. So, and he...
Sun visor.
Sun visor, yeah. And he told me about it, and he's like, the next time she's in your car, get a video and get her to open the sun visor. And so I videoed her as like on the sly. She's put the sun visor down, this fake spider's dropped on her, and literally she's jumped everywhere. She's wet herself, like terrified. So that's Jeremy McGovern. And she's been planning her comeback for probably 3 years now, and it's got to heights that are not well, basically. So she's going to get him back. Don't worry about it.
What about Roving Brian? Now, when did that idea come about, and whose idea was it? And you can tell the story.
I can't remember whose idea it was, but why it ever come up, I'm not sure. But there's for anyone that watches Formula One, you'll know a guy by the name of Martin Brundle, who does a grid walk before each Formula One Grand Prix. He'll walk up to Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise's security guard will tell him to piss off, doesn't give him a minute. Then he'll walk up to the guy at Ferrari who can't speak English. Then he bumps into some sportsman that he gets the wrong name of. And he does this thing for about 10 minutes. He doesn't get one name right. He doesn't speak to one person. But for some reason, you're glued to watching it because you know that something is going to happen. And that was the sort of idea of doing it. But with these precious guys that play footy today, you know, if they have a hamstring injury or a toothache, they're not allowed to talk. Club get to them and say, no, don't talk to him, and, you know, don't tell them what your finger injury is. You know, they might find out and all that sort of shit. So the carry on with clubs today, and I know West Coast and others, it's really difficult to be given permission to be able to go and interview more than one player. What clubs love is, like West Coast, is they love one player like Will to stand up against a sponsor board, be interviewed, and that's it. Because they can control it. Well, that's just 3 minutes of boring bullshit. And so we just wanted to try and bring a reality, a realism to what was going on in the change rooms. And it was never about what I said or what the players said. It was more just about the pictures and the camera following you around, so you saw things in the background. So it's quite difficult to do. I challenge anyone out there, 20 minutes of national TV by yourself, to go out and keep it going for 20 minutes. I have actually run into players. I've walked up to players that I've had not known their names, because as a commentator you call everyone by their surnames. All of a sudden I'm sitting here next to Schofield. I can't go up to Schofield and say, hey Schofield, I've got to know that his Christian name is such. And so I don't know. I remember I went up to a St Kilda player, David Armitage, who didn't play, had a hamstring injury, and this is the sort of trouble you can get yourself into. And I was short on a guest, so I saw him landing. I said, David, will you be back next week after the hamstring? He said, yep, no worries. And he was standing with three guys, really well dressed, St Kilda ties on, in suits. And I said, well, what have you done? He said, I've had the day at the footy with these three gentlemen here. I said, well, introduce us. And it was dead silence. And he didn't know any of their names. They were three directors of his football club that he'd sat with all day, and he didn't know who they were. So that was not good for him. It was quite funny for me, but anyway.
Now, I remember Toby Nankervis brushed you off, didn't he?
Yes.
Now he's.
But that's all right. We love players to do that. That's fantastic. If they don't want to talk, people at home, sitting at home, aren't forming an opinion of me if Chris says no to an interview. They're looking at Chris and going, well, what a dickhead. You know, why couldn't you give him 10 seconds? So, you know, that's the way I look at it, and I think that's the way people at home look at it.
Now, Will, you've got your own podcast that's going on, and you've been getting a fair bit of great feedback around it, and been doing some great stuff too.
Yeah, it's back chat, Carl. We'll have to get you on. It'd be quite good to get back on, reminisce about 92. I actually got off the phone a little earlier from the 80s. They do want their haircut back that you're rolling now. Not even a grimace from you, Carl.
And their bottle of dye.
It's been good, mate. We sit down and chat with just footy stories. We've had Masto on. Love to have Brian and Hodge on. The dynamic works better. Sat down with Mason Cox over in Melbourne last week. That dynamic of opponents and people that might have beaten you, or you've beaten them. There's not a lot of that in the media. It's a lot of media speaking to athletes, which is what Brian's talking about. The roaming Brian's meant to not humanise, but it's meant to show more personality than standing in front of a sponsor deck saying the company line. Like, I think people, in terms of insight, want to hear what players are up to. Want to hear some stories about how they've got where they've got to, the mindset, the different things like that. So that's what we do with Backchat. Free plug there. Thank you, Carl.
There's a couple of things that I don't like, boys. I don't like the stand, and I don't like the umpires saying, stand, stand. And then I don't like the umpires continually have to picking the two ruckmen out. I mean, it's a lot like Auskick for me, watching that. Like, if you've got two ruckmen, don't they just contest, and if there's a third man up, you pay a free kick? Why do they have to pick the two ruckmen?
Hawthorn used to... I remember Simo, one of the first things he brought into West Coast was the third man up, because Hawthorn were just the major players of that, and that was completely taken out of the game.
Yeah, I think the reason why they brought it in is because ruckmen were pretty much not getting used as much. They were standing there as a decoy, and you're right, we used to make sure that our ruckman, whether it be Robbie Campbell or someone, would engage with a Sandilands. And because obviously Sandilands is going to win every tap, so he would engage on that side. And our job was to run up from the other side and try and knee Sandilands, but also get the tap out to try and get 2 for 1. So it was a way of, I guess, limiting a ruckman who had total dominance. So that's why we used to use it. But then as soon as they brought it in, I know Jordan Lewis almost finished up not long after that, and so did I, because it just sort of helped your game and it just sort of added a different feature to a midfielder's game.
So, the stand rule. Brian?
Got to stop changing the rules, Cole. I don't give a fuck about what rules they are, but you've got to stop changing the rules. Guys like Hodge and bloody Chris and Will, they want the rules changed every fucking 5 minutes. It's time that we stop. This generation controlling our game is a load of bullshit, and we just got to stop changing the rules and just let them play, please. Because I can't sit up here as a broadcaster and say that I absolutely 100% love the game at the moment, but I will say it because that's my job, but I would love for it to be absolutely 100% true.
Yeah.
Because these guys are more skilled, more capable, fitter than anyone has ever been in the history of the game. And if we let these guys just play, we'll see something pretty spectacular.
We're old, but being all up one end does my head in. Like so many blokes around the footy, 15 hand passes because you make a mistake, you've got no one to kick to up forward. So you go backwards around circles sideways so you can transition to the other end.
Isn't
that just making it twice as hard?
Yeah, but that's by team. Teams do that. And Freo are playing that way a little bit at the moment. Some teams hold 6 forwards. You know, they want to back their forwards in, they want to back their midfielders in to get it one-on-one. So you can't say that's an AFL thing. Like that, some teams do play a way that is good to watch.
See, this is the problem.
What?
This is the way they think.
Who's they? Yeah. I'm retired. I retired 2 years ago.
These generations that are coming through now.
Boys, what is no?
Hodgie's full of shit. Come on, Hodgie, tell us why.
No, the reason why they continue to change the rules, and I'm a fan, I hate how they tweak it and then they bring in the dissent rule and then they change how the next rule mid-season. The reasons why they bring it in is because as players, as coaches, they spend a whole pre-season on trying to manipulate the rules and bend the rules to suit their game style. And that's what coaches do. The second up jumping was done. We've done that to try and manipulate the rules for us as players. So what the AFL are trying to do, and they do it way too often, I agree with you, BT, but they try to do it to have more flow. So if you look at Richmond was the best team at corralling and delaying off the mark so they could get numbers behind the ball. As soon as you took in the stand rule, as much as it...
But Hodgie,
BT, shut up.
No, this is exactly why...
Go roam the room and talk to someone.
This is exactly why we should not allow coaches, in particular, to control our game and ask them about the rules.
Can you imagine commentating with him? Every time you go and say something, he interrupts you, it's his turn to shine again.
Please,
Can I finish
Hodgie.
my conversation, Brian?
Off you go.
Go on, bore us shitless.
I was finished. It's all right.
Go on, off you go.
No, I think that's the reason why they try and do it, because Richmond was so good and it stopped the game from flowing. BT wants forwards to be 6v6. The way that they did the stand rule is, as much as it's annoying and listen, the umpires have their time, it stopped Richmond from corralling and stopping teams from moving the ball quickly from one end to the other. So I like that rule, just the fact that it stopped Richmond and made them shit again.
When good teams play, teams play each other,
it's fantastic.
It's still good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So isn't that on the poor teams of this competition to lift their standard?
Yeah, that's exactly why.
Which has never been different.
But the rules and the way that coaches have played, the coaches have figured it out. And teams that get beat, at the bottom of the ladder are trying to slow scoring down, so it's not as bad and it's not a great look for the game. But we've always had good games and bad games, I agree.
Yeah. Now, BT, go on.
I was going to say, Chris, can you talk so BT can interrupt you too?
What do you want me to say, boys? Stand the mark rule is fucking shit.
Yeah, it is. And especially when you encroach the area. BT, I want to finish with the Coleman medal story, please.
Oh, yes, look, for those up the back that aren't listening to the talking, just one last thing. So I mentioned about the Coleman medal, and none of these boys have won one. I know Hodgie's won 4 premiership medals, but let's face it, we don't play for team glory, play for individual glory. And I won't go through the 100 goals that I kicked in that particular year, but I will go through the last 2. This is actually a true story. This actually happened. Last game of the year, Collingwood were playing St Kilda. Both teams had to win to get into the finals, and I had to kick 2 goals to become the 4th player in Collingwood's history to kick 100 goals. Anyway, in the open, I was playing with my great mate, the late Danny Frawley. We had a great relationship. And in the first minute of the game, I kicked my 99th goal, and I thought, well, it's going to be easy. I'm going to become the 4th player in Collingwood's history to kick 100 today. I'm going to win the Coleman medal, and it'll be fantastic. Didn't really give a shit about whether we won or not, despite having to make the finals. Anyway, I strained my groin. Quarter time came. Lee Matthews, who's my coach at the time, came up to me and said, Brian, what's wrong with you? I said, I've done my groin. He said, well, you'll have to come off the ground. I said, Lee, I'm about to become the 4th player in Collingwood's Collingwood's history to kick 100. I can't come off the ground. I need a couple more minutes. He said, you've got to be kidding. This is about the team making finals. I said, Lee, I don't give a shit about the team making finals. This is about me. And anyway, he said, OK, you've got 3 minutes, then I'm going to send the runner out to take you off if you don't kick your 100th goal. Anyway, this is true. Walking back to my position, umpire Peter Cameron, the brother-in-law of our vice-captain, my good mate David Cloak, come up to me and said, Brian, stay in front of Frawley. We know what's wrong with you. We'll look after you. And so I went down to full forward, very happy with myself. Ball was on centre wing, about a kick and a half away. Umpire Peter Cameron, the brother-in-law of David Cloak, vice-captain, good mate of mine, blew his whistle, said free kick downfield to Taylor. Those downfield thoughts happened upfield, and those upfield thoughts something happened downfield. No one knew. 35 metres out, directly in front, about to become the 4th player in Collingwood's history to kick 100 goals, and I kicked it out of bounds on the full. And the runner's trying to get me, and I'd given him a little bit of a coat hanger, got rid of him for a moment. Identical thing, other side of the ground, 30 seconds later. Umpire Peter Cameron, brother-in-law of David Cloak, our vice-captain, good mate, blows his whistle again, free kick downfield to Taylor. No one knows what's going on. 50 metres out, directly in front, I kick my 100th goal. Now, I know you want to applaud, but don't just yet. Because in those days, we used to have a drink with the umpires after the game, and I went up to umpire Peter Cameron, who was the brother-in-law of David Cloak, best friend. I said, Pete, in 12 years you did not give me 1 free kick, but in 1 quarter you gave me 2 free kicks. Why? He said, Taylor at the start of the year was 80 to 1 to kick 100. He said, I had $10 on you. So that actually happened.
Please put your hands together for Brian Taylor, Will Schofield, Luke Hodge and Chris Masten.